Hey everyone, welcome to today's broadcast of the Winning Digital Customer Show, and happy Columbus Day. This is our special Columbus Day edition, and we are going to talk about pitching your ideas, how to get funding, how to get buy-in from your boss, your SVP, your CXO, your board of directors, whoever it may be, how to do that. Now, why are we talking about that on Columbus Day? Well, a couple of things. First of all, apologies for Columbus. Of course, although on the one hand, we have a national holiday of Columbus Day, my daughter's college still has classes and my son's high school still has classes in protest of the idea of celebrating Columbus because, of course, Columbus was kind of a bad dude. At least that's the history as I understand it based on what's currently known. He was extremely cruel to the indigenous peoples of the various locations that he discovered or landed on, both in the United States and also other places like Haiti. And eventually, late in his career, was brought back to Spain in chains to answer for his crimes around the world. Although I don't think he faced a lot of consequences. Nevertheless, not necessarily a character that we should emulate in a lot of different ways. But when it comes to pitching things, there's certainly one aspect of the Columbus story which is quite interesting and perhaps a little bit inspiring that occurred before he committed so many of those horrendous acts. You probably know the story that Columbus, even though Columbus was Italian, of course, his voyage on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria to the United States. Well, I'm hesitating here because where he wound up was different than where he set off to go, right? But his voyage to search out a better path to the Far East, a better path to India and China and places like that, was funded by King Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. So he had to go persuade these monarchs to give him the money he needed for what was a very bold vision. He had a belief based on his own map work, his nautical planning and cartography, that instead of following the traditional route, long and arduous route of getting to the Far East in order to import goods like spices, that it would be possible to sail west from Europe, such as from Spain, and actually reach Asia that way. And he had done all kinds of calculations, which led him to believe that it was a reasonable length trip to take a shortcut, if you will, on the ocean going in that direction. But he needed a fair amount of money and support from a government in order to be able to make this trip. He tried to get it from a number of different governments. He went to France. He went, of course, to Italy. He tried to send someone to England. He was all over Europe trying to find somebody who would put money in to fund this grand venture. Sound like anyone you know? Maybe you, not to compare you to the horrific Columbus, but I think most of us that are trying to get transformational things done are facing this challenge. How do we persuade people? Despite, if we have a big, bold idea of a new and different way to do things, which Columbus certainly had, how do we persuade people that it's worth the risk to bet on us and to enable us to go off and try to prove that our vision of a better future, so to speak, in this case, a better way of creating trade routes with the Far East is possible? So Columbus, I don't really have the details of how Columbus went about persuading people, but today we're going to talk about what I've seen in the corporate world about what works when persuading people, some tips and techniques for the next time you need to stand up and convince somebody to support your project, give you funding, just buy into a big, bold vision like the one that Columbus was pitching. Of course, one key lesson learned from Columbus is certainly persistence. Columbus didn't just go to one monarch and get turned away and say, oh, well, I guess this isn't going to work. He went to monarch after monarch after monarch. In fact, he went to the Spanish court twice. The first time he went to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. I should add, also two somewhat unsavory characters in history, at least for my people's perspective. I'm Jewish, and at the same exact time, Ferdinand and Isabella were funding Columbus's journey west, looking for a new route to Asia. They were also involved in the expulsion of Jews from Spain, which occurred under the Inquisition. And at almost exactly the same time, they issued an edict telling all Jews in Spain they either had to convert to Christianity or essentially pack up their stuff and go, to leave behind a lot of their any wealth that they had accumulated, essentially because the terms of the expulsion didn't really give them much opportunity to take much with them, and get the heck out. In fact, little known fact, Columbus's voyage to the Far East, or what would wind up being his voyage to America, was delayed by several days because there were so many ships leaving the ports of Spain filled with Jews fleeing Spain under the Spanish expulsion order that they had to delay his ship, because after all, he wasn't on as tight of a timeline. The Jews had a certain date by which they had to be out of Spain or face death. So they delayed Columbus's trip for a couple of days so that they could get all those other ships, all the traffic, to get out of Spain. In any case, very sad time, and that happened on Ferdinand and Isabella's watch. So a whole bunch of unsavory characters involved in this story. But in any case, what I was trying to say before I got off on that little tangent was that Columbus went to Ferdinand and Isabella twice. The first time he went, they essentially sent his proposal to a committee who studied all of his analysis, because of course Columbus had to propose why he believed that this idea that he had of sailing west to get to India would actually work. And he had all kinds of calculations and maps that he had put together to show why he believed this was true. And they sent it to a committee, and the committee analyzed it and concluded that Columbus was wrong, that his calculations were flawed, and that it was probably much, much greater distance than Columbus had estimated in order to get from Europe sailing west to China. And that caused the first time that he pitched it to be rejected. And then he went back sometime later with, I guess, a fresh pitch, a new story, a new angle. We don't know exactly, of course. The records aren't detailed. And he got the funding. He got what he wanted, and he was sent off, of course, on his journey. So here's a guy. And by the way, when the Spanish committee that was assigned by Ferdinand and Isabella to analyze Columbus's proposal, and they came back and said he was wrong, they, of course, were right. Columbus was totally wrong. Columbus's vision of what it would take to sail west to get to Asia so that they could create new trade routes was completely flawed. Now, he happened to stumble across something arguably even more valuable, which is to quote unquote discover, at least for the Western Europeans at the time, even though, of course, it was already populated with indigenous people and had previously been quote unquote discovered by Leif Erikson and perhaps others. Nevertheless, relative to the world in which he lived at the time, Western Europe, he rediscovered, shall we say, the continents of America, and that turned out to be far more valuable for Spain than any new trade route to Asia would have been. So he kind of lucked into something that was even bigger than what it was that he was set out to do in the beginning. And you could argue it's the ultimate pivot, right? Columbus became wealthy and successful as a result of going after something bold, even though what he actually accomplished was not what he was setting out to do. So, you could argue that was just dumb luck, or you could argue that fortune favors the bold, right? And someone who knows how to be persistent and get things approved and funded so that he can get out there and go after one thing, ultimately is better off than the person. Columbus certainly would not have been better off had he recognized the flaws in his calculations that the Spanish committee had discovered and decided to stay home and never go anywhere. So clearly, being wrong is not necessarily the worst thing in the world if you make something out of it. In any case, so Columbus must have been the ultimate pitch master to eventually get a royal court, despite the complete flaws in his vision of what he was going to do, to fund his efforts. And by the way, I don't know if it's really true or not. I think it may not be true, but one of the stories of the time was that in order to get the money, that Queen Isabella actually had to pawn her royal jewels in order to pay for Columbus's journey. That may or may not be true, but suffice to say, it doesn't appear to have been a minor investment that was made by the Spanish court. It wasn't one of those, oh, we have so much money, Columbus is a drop in the bucket. It was a significant decision and a significant investment for them to make, a significant risk for them to take, to be willing to fund this journey. So, in the spirit of Columbus's moment of triumph in his ability to persuade, despite being completely wrong, the king and queen of Spain to give him the money and support that he needed, let's talk a little bit about how you accomplish the same thing in your world. So I want to talk about some material that I cover in my book, Winning Digital Customers, The Antidote to Irrelevance. And actually, if you buy that book, which I hope you already have, it comes with 3 free additional ebooks, one of which is called Pitching Digital Transformation. And actually, some of what I'm going to talk about is actually from that ebook, which accompanies Winning Digital Customers. But in any case, what I really go into there is how do you go about persuading the powers that be to give you the funding and support that you need for your big, bold, ambitious venture. I guess the first thing I would say, and what I want to fundamentally talk about today is storytelling and how you use storytelling to accomplish that. A higher level idea would be this idea that you've probably heard before, that most decisions are made emotionally. Most human decisions, whether they're business B2B type decisions or whether they're consumer decisions to buy a certain car or what have you, are made emotionally. Many studies have shown this, and then rationalized later. So you need some kind of a rational basis for pitching a big initiative, but a lot of it is going to be done emotionally, because emotions are much more powerful than is rationality in the human psychology. And furthermore, anytime you're asking for something big, you're asking for a commitment, a sizable budget, you're asking someone to stick their neck out and provide support for something, even if you don't intend to, you are playing to their emotions, because the number one most powerful emotion in the human psychology is fear. And if you're asking someone to take a risk, you're naturally playing into their concerns about what if this doesn't work out? How will I look if I give this project $10 million and we go down this path? Will you really deliver, person who's pitching this project to me? Will this wind up making me look foolish? Will this wind up getting me fired for having made this choice? So even if you don't try to be emotional at all, and you just present a pure logical explanation as to why this is a good investment, there's always the risk that whatever you're explaining, whatever spreadsheets you're showing, whatever project plan you're showing, might not come true. Because haven't we all been through that? Don't we all know that when someone comes and pitches a project, especially if it's a large, ambitious project, there's all kinds of risks, and the outcome is never certain. The process will never go completely smoothly, or at least rarely. And so whatever mathematical analysis has been done, 100 other projects have come before that executive or that committee or that board of directors claiming that if you only invest this much money, we will give you this return on investment. And very often it doesn't really happen that way. So showing the rational reason why this investment is going to work out well is rarely enough to combat the fear, because the fear is that all that rationality is flawed, it's wrong. And most people have had that experience in the past. And so you need the rational argument, because people need to be able to justify their decisions rationally, but you need to appeal to people's emotions. I'm strongly guessing that Columbus went to Ferdinand and Isabella and painted a picture of what it would mean for the country of Spain if they were the ones who founded this route, how the world would change, how their position of power and influence would change. He painted them an emotional picture and got them excited. He didn't just lay out if you invest this much, you will receive this much return on your investment. I don't know that for a fact, but this is my strong suspicion. And even if you look at the picture here of this guy on his pillow, kneeling in front of the monarch, maybe it's just my imagination, but I'm picturing this guy weaving a story, not just asking for money and guaranteeing a return on investment. So stories. So what does emotion have to do with stories? Well, stories are one of the most powerful ways of triggering people's emotions, getting people emotionally connected to what you're talking about. They are also one of the most powerful ways of just plain old getting people to pay attention. If I'm thinking about Columbus explaining his cartography and explaining to Ferdinand and Isabella why it is that he thinks that he can sail west and get to China or India, he must have had some reasons, right? Well, there's this angle and this thing, and I calculated this, and probably a bunch of numbers. He probably used one of those sextants and all that kind of stuff. Sounds boring, right? Listening to all that explanation about how he figured this out probably is a very dry, boring, scientific explanation of sorts, and not the kind of thing that's going to appeal to someone's emotion. So we want to think about how to leverage stories, because stories are what take you on an emotional journey, and stories are what get you to pay attention, because the humans, evolutionary psychologists tell us, we've talked about this on this show before, that the human mind is programmed to pay attention to stories because they might have some kind of survival value. So the components that make up a story aren't just sort of an art form that someone came up with, the way someone might have defined, I don't know, impressionist painting or the rules of a haiku. The rules of a story are a little bit more like the major scale in music. It's something that appears to be built into our DNA, that when we hear certain things, we become engaged, interested, and we wait for a resolution. So let's just for a moment remind ourselves, what are the components of a story? And then I just want to give you an example of how you can use storytelling when giving a pitch, just to kind of give you a real world example. Because I could imagine, I would be sympathetic if you're sitting there thinking, wait, Howard, I get storytelling, right? Like I've gone and seen, I don't know, Star Wars or some great movie, right? A Few Good Men. It's a great story. But like, how does that relate to, I have a meeting tomorrow where I have to go explain to the, executive committee why they should fund our project. I'm not going to go play the movie A Few Good Men for them, right? Like, what is storytelling really? What's the practical way you can use storytelling when you're trying to do this sort of thing? So I'm going to give you that before we leave today. But first, let's just remind ourselves, what are the components of a story? Every story has to have a hero, a main character in the story. And that hero is trying to accomplish something, right? Whether it's Robin Williams and Mrs. Doubtfire trying to spend more time with his kids while he's divorced, despite the fact, or whether it's, the characters in Star Wars who just want to have a peaceful life and live in a peaceful galaxy and be safe from the Empire. In any story, you're going to find a hero, and there's something that hero wants. And there's going to be a problem. Some kind of an enemy or something standing in the way. If you've ever gone to a movie where everything's great the whole time, people are just happy, that's not a movie you'd probably sit through for 2 hours, right? Stories have to have some sort of problem or conflict in them. Why? Because that's what triggers the sense of survival value. If I tell you a story, I say, I went to a bar yesterday and there was a huge bar fight, but I managed to get out unscathed. You're going to want to hear that story because maybe you'll be in a similar situation. You're going to need to know how to get out of it, right? But if I say I went last night out for a drink and I just sat and had a lovely evening all evening, want to hear more about it? I mean, that might not be such an interesting story. There's no conflict. There's no problem that's getting resolved. So when people tell you about problems and how they were resolved and also what the strategy was, that's the fourth component. So you have a hero who has a goal, but who has a problem or an enemy, something standing in the way of the goal. And there's some kind of a strategy. Every story has a strategy. In Mrs. Doubtfire, Robin Williams' strategy is he's going to dress as a female housekeeper. Sometimes the strategies are crazy, right? That's sometimes what makes a movie interesting. An unusual, surprising, novel strategy. A strategy to defeat the enemy on the battlefield. A strategy to get back with your estranged spouse. A strategy to destroy the Death Star. Whatever it may be, you're always going to find that the heart of a movie, the main action of a movie, a strategy to steal the Hope Diamond, whatever it may be, your main character is going to have a goal. There's going to be something standing in the way. And the kind of crux of the movie is the strategy. And that's critical because that's what's going to trigger that survival part of your brain that's going to say, I'm going to learn from this story whether or not this type of strategy, first I'm going to learn a new strategy, and I'm going to learn whether it works or not through the end of the story. This is why we want to hear the end of the story. If you've ever been one of those movies where it kind of ends with a cliffhanger, like you're going to have to watch the next movie, and by the way, that won't be out for 2 years. I mean, that really annoys a lot of people, right? Now, why do you feel so annoyed? You could just make up your own ending, right? Why are you so annoyed there's no ending? Because there's a part of you that needs that ending because that's the payoff. And why are you wired to want that ending? It's because that is going to tell you whether the strategy worked, and you can then file that away and potentially use it yourself. Now, you might say, well, I'm not planning on having to fly an X-Wing fighter and destroy, a Death Star. No, but the reason you find a story interesting is that you can somehow relate to it. Because if you can't relate to it, if you can't see any applicability to the story for your life, you find that movie boring. A lot of people jokingly talk about how boring the movie The English Patient was. There's a Seinfeld episode about this movie. And it's essentially, I don't even remember it that well, but it's a story about a soldier and a nurse and their love story. And for me, I couldn't relate to the story, right? It was a long time ago. It was slow. The characters didn't mean anything to me. They didn't connect to my life. So my brain didn't see any survival value in that story. And so I was bored by it. Now, there may be other, particularly women, tended, the cliche was it was women who found this movie, engaging. Maybe that story related a little bit more to the things in their life. And so they saw more survival value in it. So that's what you want to be thinking about. When you want to really have an audience in the palm of your hand, you need to tell them a story that they can relate to, where there's a hero with a goal and a problem and a strategy. And then, of course, you're going to want to see at the end of the movie what happens. What's the resolution? I don't have a slide that says resolution, but clearly you need that so you can find out whether the strategy worked or not. Okay, so that's the structure. Those are the elements you need for any story to be interesting to somebody. That and the story itself needs to be relatable, as I said. So now, how do you use this to pitch digital transformation? Because we're not here talking about, let's say, a feature film. So I'm going to give you a little structure. And I think somewhere we have an infographic of this. And if so, we'll try to put that in the notes for this so you can get it if you want to go back through it without having to rewatch the video. The first thing you need to do when you're pitching digital transformation is just establish the world of the story. Every movie starts that way, right? The first thing that happens is usually not the main problem. It's just helping you understand, who are these people? Who are these characters? What's the world of this story? And so that's the first thing you need to do. So you might say, for example, that we have a loyal following of clients, but that audience of clients or customers, our customer base has been shrinking in recent years and our profits have been going down. Now, that may not be true in your case. You need to figure out what is the situation in your industry. Maybe it's our competitors have been innovating or whatever else, but you're starting to establish a world of what's going on. Now, of course, you're probably talking to an audience that knows a lot about the world of your company. So this can be very brief, but that's the first thing. And then you want to introduce a problem. You want to say, what is the burning platform? Our competitors are now offering our customers a more innovative experience that they prefer. The research that we've done shows that customers overwhelmingly prefer our competitors' products, and our competitors continue to innovate and hire more people to do X, Y, Z, whatever it is. So this problem is significant and it's increasing. And we can see in our sales figures how this is impacting us. So you're making it clear. The establishment of the world of the story may have started to indicate some of these things, but now you're making it really, really clear that there's a problem. And then you probably want to magnify that problem. You want to say, not only is it a problem today, but step 3, you want to paint the scary picture. In other words, if this trend continues, where will we be in a year? Where will we be in 2 years? Where will we be in 5 years? If newspaper sales keep declining and we fail to attract a new digital audience, not only is that hurting our results this year, but if it continues on this trend within a few years, we may not be able to even pay our expenses or whatever it is. Again, I'm not saying you should make anything up or be unnecessarily or inaccurately forecasting doom, but very, very often when companies, for example, are looking for a big transformation, it's really necessary. Today, if you don't keep up with the pace of change in the world, you risk irrelevance. That's a lot of what my book is about and what to do about it. And so very often you have the opportunity to make that clear. And it's important to provide whatever detailed information will help paint that scarier picture. And by the way, they say that every movie has 2 endings. Every movie has 2 endings. Have you heard that idea? Star Wars has 2 endings. The first Star Wars, let us say. I know there's many Star Wars. There's 2 endings. There's the ending they showed in the theater where Luke successfully destroys the nuclear reactor in the center of the Death Star and blows it up and massively sets back the bad guys, Darth Vader and all of them, the Emperor, and gives at least a period of time of freedom and prosperity for the galaxy. And there's another ending of that story. In the other ending, he fails. The rebel forces are defeated. They shoot him down. The Death Star is completed. They start blowing up planets left and right, and they enslave the entire galaxy. Now, what movie has that ending? No movie. That ending was not the ending of the movie, but it was the possible ending. While you're watching Star Wars, one of the reasons you're on the edge of your seat, one of the reasons that you're engaged is because you know that it's not clear at that moment whether the ending is going to be the good ending or the bad ending. And that the reality, the potential of that negative ending is a critical part of creating the stakes and the suspense and the intensity of the film. So don't be afraid, even if it makes you not the most popular guy in that moment, even if it feels like you're twisting the knife a little bit. Again, don't go overboard, don't lie, don't exaggerate, but be clear as to what the stakes are if something doesn't change. Believe me, that's going to get people ready to hear the next thing, which is the strategy. When you tell them that they are potentially really screwed if they don't do something, and you say it in a credible way, and then you say, but I think I have a solution. There's a way out of this mess. You reveal a bold plan, just like in Star Wars, when they realize that they're in big trouble because the Death Star is almost complete and they can destroy planets. All of a sudden, someone says, we have a plan. And it requires flying. If you remember the movie, flying whatever it is, a spaceship, a jet-wing, X-wing fighter through this little tiny exhaust vent and then hitting a tiny, tiny target inside the Death Star to destroy it. So it's not necessarily a risk-free plan, but it is a bold plan, right? Here is a way that we can survive and be successful. And very often, as I said earlier, your plan is not absolutely certain. You can never be absolutely certain that a big, bold, ambitious plan is going to work as planned, as envisioned. And if you say that you're certain, you're going to lose credibility because the people in the room know that you can't guarantee them that. And nobody wants to be lied to. This is why you need to have done the prior thing. You need to paint a scary picture, because just like in Star Wars, even though they know that there's a great risk of failure, after all, come on, they're flying their spaceship inside the enemy's base to destroy it at the center. It sounds kind of crazy, but it's worth trying because the stakes are so high. So you want to have that bold plan, and you want people to be ready for a bold plan that will really eliminate the risk. And in explaining this, it's good to use nested stories. What are nested stories? Well, nested stories are like subplots, right? When you watch the movie of Star Wars, you see that it's not only about destroying the Death Star, it's also about a love affair or a love relationship between Han Solo and Leia, and it's also about some mysteries about the past and Luke and Leia's relationship and some other things. So you have multiple things going on in many stories. Nested stories in a business presentation, I like to use them to help bring to life what I'm talking about. So let me give you a quick example, because of course we're tight on time here. There's more examples in my book, but let's say you're trying to paint the problem, and you say, our customers are extremely frustrated. The problem today is our customers are extremely frustrated when they engage with our app, and many of them don't complete their transactions. Now you could go on and say, and here's why that's going to be a problem if it continues, and go through the rest of the steps I just made. But you could also drop down into a nested story, a little subplot. Here would be an example. You could say, for example, we did a research study and we spoke to one of our customers. Her name is Sarah, and she was trying to plan a vacation using our website. And she encountered this problem, and she encountered that problem. And then she called our call center, and here's what our call center told her, which, by the way, was totally wrong. And then she did this, and then she did that. And finally, she got so frustrated, she did this other thing. So that is an example of the kind of experience we're giving to our customers. So now let's talk about what will happen if we continue on this course. So did you see what I did there? I stopped one story, which was a story about your company and the problems that your company is having and what you need to do to overcome it. And I dropped down into a story about a woman named Sarah and the effort that she has to try to use your company's products or services. So that's an example of nested stories. And you can actually go several levels deep with nested stories. I talk about it more in my book. I'm going to run out of time here if I keep giving you details of nested stories. So suffice to say, that's another tool, and that's another way of keeping people more engaged. Now, at some point, you also want to think about letting the audience become co-creators. Because one of the things when you give a story like a digital transformation pitch, one thing that's different between this and a movie is that the ending is not known. You can't tell them the ending. You're telling them, you're in the middle of the movie with them. So this is an opportunity to let them become co-creators. As you talk about your strategy and as you talk about the plan and what could occur, get them participating. If they start to participate more and more as co-creators of the story, they're much more likely to be on your side and give you what you want. Ask them what they think the likelihood of success of the plan is. Ask them what they think the greatest risks of the plan are. So you're not there to give them a whitewash story about how everything will be great. You're there to recruit them onto the rebel forces. You're there to get them to be a part of solving this problem with you. You're there to get them to become the hero. You notice I talked about the hero being a key component of any story, and yet I didn't start this process by defining who the hero is. Because when you give a business presentation, you don't start by saying who the hero is, but implicitly, the hero is always the people you are trying to persuade. Not you, because after all, who wants to give you money to make you an even bigger hero? No, you're coming to them to give them the opportunity to be the hero. And you may leave that implicit, unsaid, until you get to the very end. But ideally, as they become co-creators, they're starting to step into that role of being the hero. And then lastly, the last step of this type of presentation is an emotional ending. Don't be careful not to make this mistake. Sometimes when you get to step 6, where you're letting them become co-creators, more traditionally, you might call this the questions and answers portion of the presentation, right? You're starting to move from presenting content, to being a storyteller, to engaging in dialogue with the people in the room. Now, that's great. The right kind of dialogue can move things forward substantially. So you want that. But just be careful you don't run the clock out with the dialogue. You don't get to the point where you're just all talking about different things and you're kind of talking about different possibilities. And then before you know, it's like, oh, I just realized we're 3 minutes over the end of the meeting. All right, well, thanks, everyone. Talk to you later. No. You want to make sure that a couple minutes before you're going to run out of time, you create an emotional ending. You need to give them the satisfaction of ending the story. Now, I know I told you before, but the story's not over. So how can you end the story? You can't say, good news, everybody, you gave me the money and I solved the problem and everyone's going to live happily ever after. You can't do that. But remember how I said every movie has 2 endings, the one that actually is in the movie and the one that you just fear? Well, you can use a similar principle here. You can remind them how challenging this is going to be and how critical their role is going to be, and then paint a picture of success. Because up till now, you've been using fear a lot. You've been painting a picture of what will happen if we don't act. You've been laying out a bold plan. Hopefully that plan has some positive aspirational qualities to it. But this is your opportunity to say, folks, when we succeed in this, when we achieve our digital transformation, when we deliver the customer experience that we will envision as part of this, we will be able to stand toe-to-toe with any competitor in the marketplace. We will be able to get a level of customer satisfaction beyond which we've ever experienced. This company will be fulfilling its destiny, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you need to fill in the blanks for what you're talking about. And you see, of course, that what I'm saying is a little bit vague because I'm trying to be general here. In your case, hopefully you can be more specific. What's it going to mean when we succeed? So you can, again, you're using emotion and you're giving them that emotional ending. It's not a true ending. It hasn't happened yet, but you're giving them that emotional completion of getting to experience what it will be like to live happily ever after. And doing that is the best way of getting them to leave the meeting feeling with a good feeling, because you want to leave with a good feeling combined with that feeling of, in order to get that good feeling to last, instead of just being in that one moment where we all envision what the world will be like once we've accomplished these great things. You don't just want to envision it. You want it to be real. In order to do that, you're going to be asking for something from them. So that's the last thing in the meeting. You're going to give them that emotional ending, the vision of what it could be, and then you're going to say, but I need your help. In order to deliver this, I'm going to need this kind of funding. I'm going to need this kind of support. And by the way, always good to let them know, guys, it's not going to be a smooth ride. But you've shown them enough of why this is essential. You've shown them enough of the scary future that they're willing to sign up, even though it's not going to be a paved road, because you know that you are not going to be able to deliver probably a smooth, seamless transformation process, because no one ever has. And so you probably can't either. And you're going to need their support, not only now to kick it off, but as the initiative progresses, when you hit problems and challenges. And so I would let them know that up front. And that's also powerful because it continues to paint them as the hero. They're not just a hero because they've allocated budget. You're going to be coming back to them again and again as you move through this as a key heroic figure to make sure that this is successful. And one reason why that might seem like a negative, instead of saying, don't worry, guys, I have it from here. You just give me the money and you don't have to worry about it. Instead, you're telling them, no, I'm going to need you every step of the way. But when you've successfully painted a picture of an exciting victory at the end of the rainbow, and then you tell them you're going to need them every step of the way, that means that victory is really also going to be theirs. Not just because they're the ones who approved your initiative, voted for it, gave you a thumbs up, but because you're going to be having them play a key heroic role. So when the victory comes, they truly will be a hero. So that's some examples, albeit a little bit generic because I'm trying to make it work for everybody, of how you can apply these principles of storytelling to a typical situation where you have an hour in a boardroom and you need to pitch something that you need money and support for. Hopefully that made sense. You can also, as I say, refer to my book or my ebook, the book is Winning Digital Customers. The ebook is Pitching Digital Transformations, comes with the main book. Or reach out if you have any questions or there's anything that my team and I can do to be helpful to you as you undertake your heroic efforts to transform your company. Hopefully this has been helpful. Happy Columbus Day, everybody. For those of you that are getting to have it off, or even if you're working, have a fantastic rest of your day, rest of your week. And as always, keep transforming.